Hello and welcome to Today in Woburn. We are taping outside today because I am obsessed with spring. We talked about it last episode, and even though it's windy and you're going to see our hair flying, we are getting fresh air, which is fabulous. So we have two very special guests today. We have Senator Friedman up first, and then later on we'll be talking with mayoral candidate Michael Concannon. Welcome, Senator Friedman.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here and putting up with the wind. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
It's cold.
It is a little chilly. We'll have to get you some hot chocolate or something afterwards. We saw each other recently at an SCI event, which was really fun. It was a youth contest, which you had helped support through a grant and such, and very proud one of our Woburn teams won one of the grants that was given out that day. It was a really great event.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about why you support programs like that for youth leadership development.
I think they're really important and they're really successful. It's really a wonderful experience for me to see kids working at that level and adults supporting their efforts, and it just gives them this whole entree into a world that they don't really know about and may not understand right now, but in the future they'll be in a situation and they'll say, oh, I did that. That's what they mean by putting a plan together. That's why it's important to understand how to give a presentation. And so I just think it's a great use of resources. And I think a lot of the kids that I saw there probably don't have that opportunity. And so I think it's just a really worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, I was super impressed. I was a judge for some of the contests, and I was really impressed with the students and how much they were just brilliant ideas and so well articulated. And I agree. I think that money is going to be very well spent.
And I love that there were these, I saw these two seventh graders, and it was a very kind of simple idea, but well thought out. And I don't think when I was in seventh grade that I could have gotten up and done that presentation. So it was really impressive.
I totally agree. People who watch this show will never believe it. I was painfully shy as a child, so I gave them an enormous amount of credit. It was great.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the bills. You had two bills included in the Massachusetts Caucus for Women Legislators and the priority list for the upcoming season. One on postpartum depression screening and the other on improving pay parity for human service workers. Both are really important causes. Tell us a little bit about what that legislation is about and why you wanted to make sure that was in the forefront of what we're doing.
I'm really interested in ensuring that there is a complete range of health care for maternal health. And that includes the whole range from the time that someone might be wanting to get pregnant to after to postnatal care. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that we really don't pay attention to postpartum depression, which is quite severe and quite prevalent. And I wanted to make sure that that's included as part of a full spectrum healthcare. So that's why I was interested in it. We wanted Mass Health to support it. Mass Health actually is supporting it for a year. We want to codify that, and we also want to ensure that both parents get the support they need, because we're finding through a lot of research that it affects both parents, and it's important and it's serious. So that's why I'm really interested in that bill. And then the other bill it's a pay parity issue, right? I think people who workers who are contracted by the state but are not part of the bargaining units of the state make 30% less. And look, these are the people that are taking care of our most vulnerable. That means our children, it means our elderly parents, it means our sick loved ones. They're doing a service that we cannot live without, and we really need to pay them at least on par with what we pay what we pay our state workers. So I would really like to see that happen. Now, we've done some good things. We've increased the rates. We just want everybody to get that rate increase.
Yeah. I love that. So for those folks who are not as familiar with the legislative process, what happens next? So these have been proposed, and what are the next things? Because there's a long path between the idea to when we get to enact it.
There's quite a long path. What will happen is, so we filed the bill. then the clerks of both the Senate and the House, who basically run the bodies, will assign them to a committee. They go to a committee by law. They have to have a hearing, so there'll be a public hearing on those, and then the committee that it's been sent to will decide whether they want to pass it on or whether they don't think it's time yet. So if they pass it on, it will probably come to healthcare financing, which is my committee. Then maybe go to Ways and Means for a financial check. And then if it gets that far, it would go to the floor and we would vote on it.
So you are a strong advocate for mental health care and healthcare in general and lots of things. And we've made a lot of progress as a state look back and just the time I've been here now 30 years and really seen a big difference. How do you rate, sort of the progress we've been making, and where do you see vulnerabilities that we need to close?
I think we've made enormous progress. I think we've certainly made enormous progress in the mental health space, not so much in the equity space. But in terms of mental health, we've done the Mental Health ABC Act, where we have really strengthened our enforcement of ensuring that behavioral health gets the same attention and at the same rates as medical surgical. We've expanded telehealth, which has been a huge support especially for mental health care. We have the Health Equity Compact, which represents a sort of the start of a bill by 50 different organizations to increase equity among low income and people of color. And we've rolled out the mental health, the community health roadmap. So the mental health roadmap where we now have services in community behavioral health centers where people can just come in. They could just walk in and say, I need some help. So those are some of the big things we've done, and they're big, right? We do have a lot more work to do in terms of, number one, ensuring that we maintain access, increasing access through through the workforce, and ensuring that we have a large enough workforce, which we don't right now. Workforce is a huge issue in healthcare, as it is in other places. And we really have to focus on equity, and that's, to me, is ensuring that people in low income and minorities have access to really good healthcare, and that we look at and remove the sort of systemic issues that have been in our healthcare system, where a woman walks in and isn't believed, as much as a man, or a black woman who's pregnant doesn't have access to prenatal care. So those are just, we have to focus on that, and I think that's where we need to put our energies.
One of the things around mental health that I think is wonderful is access is increased, as you described, but it's terribly hard to find somebody, particularly for children. I mean, of all kinds. I've heard a lot of stories, personally, about children really finding a hard time finding counselors. How can we help grow that workforce so that we have the people available to do that important work?
Sure. So there's a couple things we need to look at. First thing is we put about $130 million of ARPA money directly into loan forgiveness for people who were working in the mental health field and in the primary care space. And so that, for instance, we made it possible to bring in, I think it was 7 more psychiatrists into a community behavioral health center so that they would be there to service, our residents. So loan forgiveness is great. It gets people who have the experience and maybe have the license, but they can't afford it because of their loans. It brings them in. We've done some work around changing the way that insurance bills, so that people who are, for instance, have a master's degree but are still getting their license, they can, if they're working in a clinic, they can bill, and that's really important. We've passed some legislation around provider networks, so ensuring that commercial insurers have complete and full prior provider networks, And if they don't, they have to let people go out of network to find those. But we have to do something about our pipeline. We have to bring people into this field and train them and get them trained. And that means scholarships, right? That means making sure that people have access to education. And right now, it's prohibitive for so many people. So what we find is there's a lot of folks who want to do this work. They just can't afford to do it. So we have to focus on the pipelines for behavioral health, and we also have to do something about the cost.
One of the things I know that was COVID spurred was more access to telehealth and telecounseling and things. Are those provisions that allow for that still going to maintain?
Yes.
Even past the,
yes,
I know
so
some of the emergency things are
the
taken away.
telehealth pieces we did were all in statute. They weren't done through emergency orders. So
that's great. I'm glad to hear that. There are some things I think sometimes people don't realize, like for example, you physically have to be in the state to be served, even if it's telehealth, right? So if I am away or the therapist is somewhere.
Unless your provider has a license in that state. Then you can.
Yeah. Great. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about housing. There has been a lot of new housing development in Woburn. A lot of that has been what I would consider more luxury housing, some commuter-oriented housing. The locations have been very helpful for folks who want to take the train. A lot of that build has happened there. But we're seeing an increasing number of more lower income, modest income folks. Their rents are going skyrocketing, even though they're not getting into these nice luxury apartment buildings. They're more modest homes. The rent is just exploding, and we're starting to see more and more people feel they have to leave our city.
Yep.
You know, that's a big complex issue, I realize, but you know, what kinds of things are on your mind as we look at taking care of folks who can't afford some of the new housing that's coming in?
I think that along with workforce, housing is our biggest issue. I mean, we have lots of big issues, but I feel very strongly that we need to focus on healthcare and housing. So first of all, we've put in, I think, over $1 billion in our last round of funding into affordable housing. So we're focused on it. The governor has requested that the Department of Community and Housing, Community Development and Housing be separated and housing be its own secretariat. I think at least the Senate just approved that. So there's now going to be somebody whose total focus and reason for living is housing. We have to build more housing, but we can't just build it in one place. We have to build it across the board, because it really is, it's a housing shortage. And we have been very, very parochial in how we do zoning and how we do housing. And so some places have built a lot of housing and some places haven't. So the housing choice legislation that we passed, that should help, because it reduces the local authority to a 50% approval versus 2/3 if you want to change zoning. So we've done some stuff, but we have to make it easier to build housing. We have to, we're looking at providing much more tax credits for people who are willing to do not low income and not luxury, but moderate and market rate, middle class, what we would call middle class housing. We're looking at ensuring that our public housing is up to snuff and it's livable, and and so it's going to take a lot of different pushes and efforts to solve this problem. It won't be solved overnight. It is an enormously important and serious problem, and we've got to keep our eye on it. So those are some of the things we're doing and some of the things we're looking at doing, but we need to do more.
Yeah, I know that during the COVID pandemic, there were moratoriums on evictions, and there were things that I think helped people in a short-term situation. And I don't know if we're feeling it now because those are lifted, and so now there's a lot of movement and a lot of other things. And not that everybody's being evicted but they're, the rents are going up so much they just can't maintain that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that the legislature is looking at is keeping that eviction protection in place, so that if you're applying for funding to stay in your home and you've actually started the process, then you can't be evicted.
Let the process finish.
Let the process
Yeah.
finish. So that's really
It's a good
important, 'cause
common
that gets
sense measure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I understand also, there's challenges for landlords, right, as well.
No,
and
it is.
This is not just a housing stability issue for
Right.
people who are renting. It's also the people whose costs of maintaining their home have gone
Absolutely.
up, and the
No,
fuel and all
yeah.
of those things go into it.
There are a lot of small, homeowners, and they rent, and we need to pay attention to them. But this one, it's a lot easier to keep somebody in their, in their unit than to have to go through eviction, push them out, having to get a new tenants, go through that whole process. So this really, I think, helps everybody. And it also, it's incumbent on the state to do it quickly.
Yeah. Not that long ago, we had the teacher strike in Woburn, which thankfully is behind us now. But when you look at how that played out in the media, in the city, in the meetings and things, sort of, what do you think we could have done better to prevent something like that from happening again?
So I wasn't there, and I'm not part of that process. So it's really hard for me, nor would I ever feel it's appropriate for me to comment on what happened specifically in Woburn, because I wasn't at the table and I wasn't part of it. And this is a local issue. I care a lot. I was a teacher. I care a lot about the circumstances, the environment that teachers work in. They are absolutely essential workers. And they're doing a job that is just critical to our entire civilization, is educating our kids. So I take these kinds of events pretty seriously. But I can't really say what, this person should have done this and this person, because I just wasn't.
Most of us were not in that room,
right,
and we don't want to second guess that. There is one thing though that I think is maybe worth thinking about on a broader scale. So the Mass Teachers Association has said that overall policy is to bring to court and question whether teachers can strike, and the legality of doing that, and potential legislation to change that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I feel, I need to do a lot more processing of this.
Yeah.
In general, kind of on the face of it, I have a hard time supporting striking teachers. I have a hard time supporting doctors and nurses and healthcare workers going on strike, because who really ends up paying is the patient or the child, right? And if we didn't learn anything in COVID, we sure learned what it means when kids aren't in school. So I think it's a real concern, and I think we have to look at it very carefully and figure out, well, what's the goal? What are we trying to get to? Because if we allow teachers to strike, what I'm concerned about is who's really going to suffer as kids, because they won't be in school. Yeah. So
the ideal scenario is for us to eliminate the conditions that require a strike, right? That's the ultimate solution, obviously. That's what everybody really, really wants to happen. But I know that's a complex legal issue to address.
Right.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Recently, I think it was March 31st, I hope I have my date right, was the Human Rights Campaign Transgender Day of Visibility.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I'm curious from your point of view, particularly I know you care about health and safety and mental health. What are we doing as a Commonwealth to help keep trans men and women safe in our communities and cared for in our communities?
We passed a pretty comprehensive and important piece of legislation when we passed the Provider Protection Bill, which we did last July.
Time flies.
Which covered protecting people who gave or provided or supported legally allowable health care in the Commonwealth. Gender-informed care is legal in the state of Massachusetts. And so they are covered. We are covering providers who provide gender-informed care. And they have all the protections that we can give providers who are practicing legal healthcare in the Commonwealth. So I think that's the first thing we did, and I think that really, really speaks to our commitment. I think a good outcome of a kind of visibility day is so people can start to see the faces of who we're talking about. And the science is there, and our kind of picture of our culture and the way we look at things is sort of being presented with a new picture, and so that takes people a while, and I understand that. So when we support visibility, when we allow people to come in to the State House and testify, when people start to see who we're talking about, I think it becomes an easier thing for people to understand that this is my neighbor, they need to be protected. But as a Commonwealth, we've gone pretty as far as we can in protecting.
Great, thank you for that. One of our viewers sent in a question. I'm going to paraphrase what they sent in, but give the spirit of it, which was, we did recently vote in the questions in the last ballot to add an additional tax to the most wealthy Massachusetts residents. There has been some legislative, I don't know, I guess put forward some approaches for tax cuts. It seems to conflict each other. I'm not sure, I don't have an informed opinion about that because I haven't looked deeply at what those tax cut recommendations were, but it on the surface seems like they conflict. What's your take on those tax cuts and how do you feel about those, our spirit of implementing what the voters had voted in?
So we need to backtrack a little and remember that in July, the Senate had a tax package that they put forward. It was never acted on. It was part of the Economic Development Bill. We ran out of time and it wasn't acted on because what was happening at the same time was that thing called 62F, where if we have a certain amount over surplus, it goes back to the, So I think the House was, wait a minute, we have no idea what the effect is this going to be. So then the governor had a tax package and the House has one. We haven't done it yet. We're really looking at it because we do feel that we made an agreement that if we were to go as far as the governor were going, we would sort of come out neutral. We'd have maybe $1 billion more from the increase in tax on the wealthy, but then we would have given a tax break back. And frankly, some of those tax breaks go back to the wealthy. And I have concerns about that. Having said that, I think the spirit that the governor did it in was for us to be more competitive, to feel like Massachusetts is competitive for business and high earners. And I applaud the focus of being competitive. I guess what I look at is if we want to make Massachusetts competitive, let's get our housing prices down, let's get our cost of living down just in housing and food, and keep our incredible educational system and all of the things that brought people to Massachusetts to begin with. We need workers, educated workers, not entry-level workers who can work here and live here. And so I want to focus on housing and I want to focus on healthcare. That's what I think is going to bring, I can't do anything about the weather, but except for the weather, this is an incredible place to live. So I would rather focus on that. Now, I know that we'll probably do an estate tax, really important because we haven't raised the estate limit for a number of years, and now $2 million is not, $1 million is not such a big estate anymore when your house is worth $980,000. So, so there's some things that I think I would agree on in some of those packages, and some things I would have a hard time. I'd rather spend the money on building housing.
Well, businesses need people to work.
That's right.
And if in Massachusetts we have wonderful education systems, we have amazing healthcare access in ways that a lot of places don't. But if people can't afford to stay and work, then
then it doesn't matter.
It alone will not attract people. So thank you for that. Last question for you, and then I want to just ask you an open-ended question. But We have seen recently in Arlington, one of our favorite eagle friends died because I think it was deemed poisoning.
Yeah, the rat poison.
The rat poison. And you know, in Woburn, like in most cities, there's an increasing number of rats that are around the population, so people do what they can, so they use pesticides. At the end of the day, that is harmful for a whole bunch of reasons, but so are having rats around. They present a health concern as well. Are there things that we are thinking about from a state level in terms of legislation around pesticides or other controls to get this in a better balance?
There are a couple bills that are out there and some of them I support. There's one to ban rodenticide and that class of pesticides completely. There's one to give it to allow local communities to make that decision. And then there's a home rule petition. You know, we're starting to see home rule petitions where they want authority to ban it in their community. I think all these are really important. It's a really, really poisonous pesticide, and I'm not sure once you put something into the environment like that you can get it out. And if it's doing that, you know, to birds, there's a lot of evidence that it's not good for kids, that it's not good for the ground. It's and you know, it's tough to have a balance between, you know, protecting us and what we're doing to our environment, and what we're doing, and why in our environment do we have, you know, so many rats and so many, you know. And I know that a lot of what was going on in Arlington is there's a lot of construction, and you take these old buildings and you tear them down, and you're going to find a lot of rats. So I think people are looking at it, but I do think that it's important that we protect our environment. It's pretty serious stuff. You
know, I have to tell you, just as an aside, I was in the Galapagos Islands a few weeks ago, and one of the islands, they had these little traps around, and they don't have anything that's not natural. So it was really obviously these things, and we were asking about it. And they're rat traps because rats are so invasive, and basically birds fly from other islands and drop the rat. Oh, you know, something happens and they drops and it propagated, and they were trying to deal with it. So very different from our scenario, but it reminded me that how hard it is to control an environment like that and
we
do it in a safe way.
You know, I absolutely. Yeah. But I know that there's different trapping. I think there's carbon monoxide or dry ice that you can put in there. So we just need to keep.
There's additional ways, and making those accessible to people who need them and such. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Before I let you go, anything else that has you excited that you want to make sure the residents of Woburn know about coming up in terms of legislative priorities or places that you're going to be?
Office hours. I have office hours. So we still have virtual office hours because people seem to really like them, so we're going to have those on May 9th. And if you go to my website, cindyfriedman.org, you can sign up, so we're always happy to talk to people. We're going to be doing Juneteenth here with the Attorney General, and I think that's really exciting. She's fabulous, so I hope everybody comes to that. And we'll just keep plugging. We're going to do the budget soon, so there's a lot going on.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
Welcome back. I'm here with Michael Concannon in his role as mayoral candidate, and he has an advantage being outside in that his hair isn't going to blow in the wind all over like mine has been doing. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
I'm really glad to be here and chatting with you in this capacity. And one of the things that you talked about in your announcement that you were running for mayor was talking about the difference between being a manager and being a leader. Tell us more about what that really means to you.
Sure. Essentially, there's the pithy quote that I used was that leaders lead people, managers manage things. But I think that's true, actually, and I think at the essence of leadership, it's connecting with people, trying to find a way to inspire, motivate, get them to buy into the vision and the expectation, and that's basically how you get the most out of people. And that's how I would envision the job as mayor of Woburn, leading and inspiring the workforce. We have a tremendous workforce here in Woburn. All of the city employees we know them. They're our neighbors, they're our friends. We know that they have a special commitment to this community. And I want them to know that they're appreciated, respected. I believe they should be treated with dignity. And I pledge that to them. But I also believe that that's a benefit to the residents and our community when you have an inspired, committed, appreciated workforce. So in my mind, leadership is about inspiring folks. Obviously, there are some components of management skills that are required. There is the attention to the budget and process. All of that matters. But I see management as encompassed within leadership. But leadership is a step higher. And I believe that right now in this community, that's the type of leadership we need, and I think I can bring that.
One of the things that has been a criticism for a long time, many times over the years I've heard people talk about how we don't do enough interdepartmental collaboration, trying to solve problems from lots of different angles. Not that people can't talk to each other and do things, but that there's maybe an opportunity as we try and tackle some of the more complex challenges that we face as cities, or really complex opportunities. It's not always a bad thing. Talk to me about how you would facilitate that type of collaboration across the city.
Well, that's a great point, and I do agree. That is a critical piece of delivering efficient and effective services to our residents. In my experience, as the president of the City Council, I've tried to foster that collaborative spirit, and I think we've been pretty successful. I do it as well in my private sector job, and of course, most people know, familiar with my experience with the state police. I pride myself on what I was able to accomplish there by gathering together teams, committed teams, trying to find ways where they can complement each other. I think that does start with communication. Each silo, understanding how their work and their tasks impact others, and finding ways to work together to maximize the potential, the benefit. And I strongly believe in that. I do believe it's critically important that our department heads and our workforce understand what the rest of the team is up to and what ways they could do their job that could positively impact those other departments. And I've talked to all of the department heads, almost every single person in the workforce, and I do believe there is a desire for that, and I intend to capitalize on that. That collaboration is key to a successful outcome.
Okay. Speaking of your background, are you a Republican, a Democrat, an independent voter?
I am an unenrolled voter.
So that's our version of independent.
Essentially,
unenrolled. Yeah. I should know that. I should know that word. I'm also what I always call myself an independent voter. But so
and of course in local politics we have nonpartisan elections. The party apparatus isn't as critically important as it is on the national or state level. And I just feel better being in a position where I can take each issue, take each candidate as they present, and make a decision based on that, rather than being, labeled in one camp or the other. And I think what's happening in our country is we've probably had a little bit too much of that right now. The camps. I think we could probably use a little bit more independent thinking and reaching across the aisle a little bit more. Maybe it takes a few more folks in the middle of the aisle to help that happen. So yeah, I am unenrolled.
Thank you for that. You've served on City Council for a number of years, and that is not an easy thing to do. And over those years, you've done a lot of things I'm sure that you are very excited about. Maybe there's some decisions you might rethink and change now that if you knew then what you know now might be different. When you look back, what might some of those things be that you really feel really proud of, or that maybe there's some things you might change?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on 10 years now. It'll be 10 years this year. Made a lot of decisions. I'm sure I've made mistakes along the way. I've tried my hardest to analyze each issue thoroughly, to listen to all sides of every debate, to research the issues, to understand the law, and make what I think was the best decision in every case for the city of Woburn. As I say, I'm sure there have been some missteps and mistakes along the way. I guess one example would be when St. Joseph's Church was renovated into condos. which was a great way to save and preserve the history over there. Essentially, it came down to the number of units that would work best in that development. And I was of the opinion that one fewer unit might lessen the burden on the neighbors, and I was really hopeful that we could reduce it by one more. Push came to shove, there was a vote. I voted against the project, not because I didn't think it was a good project or that I didn't think it was worthy of the preservation efforts, because I did. It was more an attempt to try to reduce the numbers.
Okay.
And when all is said and done, I do think it's a successful project. I think the neighbors have come to accept it. I think they're blending well together over there. So in hindsight, voting for that wouldn't have been so bad either. I'm sure there are other examples too. That one comes to mind. In terms of things, I'm proud of. I'm definitely proud of the collaboration that we forged on the council. When I first ran, I spoke about a professional, respectful, cooperative approach where we could agree to disagree. We'd always be courteous and respectful to each other. And I've done a lot of work to try to ensure that that happens, not only as a member, but the last year and a half as president. Yeah. I value the debate. I value everybody's opinion. And I think we've done a great job of demonstrating how different viewpoints and different folks can reach positive outcomes and still be respectful along the way. So that's something I'm very proud of. And that's the same type of approach I'd like to bring to the mayor's office, because I think it can be done. Of course, I'm proud of the tangible results that we've accomplished in 10 years. We have the new fire station, which is open now. I'm very proud to have supported that and played a role in that, as well as the new Harold Wyman School. So those tangible results, I'm also proud of those. But generally speaking, I think it's the approach to government. That's what I told people I would do, and I hope they feel that I've done it.
I love that. You've told me in conversations not on the air when we've been talking about you believe that there should be term limits in general for public office.
Yep.
And you've been on city council now for a number of years.
Yep.
Tell us about why you think that's so important and what that brings in, whether it's sort of self-instilled
Yep.
term limits or something that you might do
Sure.
more legislatively.
Well, I know somebody had the famous quote, it might have been Ben Franklin, I'm not sure. Somebody said that politicians and babies' diapers should be changed frequently.
I don't know who said that,
for the
but
same
that
reason.
that is a great visual.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I've said it before. I just think that, as I said in my announcement, I believe in the citizen representative. We're all residents of Woburn. We all want the same things. We all enjoy the same, community spirit here in Woburn. And there's 40,000 people here. They don't need me to be their city councilor or their mayor forever. There's plenty of people who can step up and do the job. And I think the whole spirit of service in our country was based on the premise that you live your life, you step up for a little while, you serve your community, you step back, let somebody else have a try. And new ideas are always churning, new approaches. I just think it's healthy that way. And I think it is a good idea to have some sort of term limit, whether it's compelled or it's just your own decision. And that goes into my decision now to run. I did not intend to serve on the council forever. I think 10 years is more than enough. It's a reasonable amount of time to make your mark, to make an impact, to accomplish what you said you would, and then give somebody else a chance. And when I first got on the council, I actually proposed the notion of term limits. And either 10 or 12 years was the initial thought. It didn't get a lot of momentum. It just didn't get the traction that I wanted. But I always had in my mind that I wouldn't serve forever, and that somewhere around 10 years is plenty. So I just think it's best for everybody to have that turnover and new thoughts.
Mm-hmm. I want to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk about housing. So Woburn is an amazing community. We have lots of diversity in our housing, actually,
Yep.
but a lot of the new housing that's coming in is more luxury housing or higher end. And the effect, unintended as it may be, is that rents are going up, even for people who are not moving into those new homes. Usually when more housing comes in, the opposite effect should happen, which is, come down,
More
just,
available, yeah.
basically supply and demand. But
Yep.
I think there's a whole bunch of factors that contribute to that not being the case. as mayor, how do we address housing instability in our community, and how do we make sure that we are allowing, an economically mixed community to continue to live and thrive here in our city?
Yeah. Well, you make a good point in that there's a whole lot of different factors that play a role in housing availability and housing cost. To some extent, we're victims of our geography and the attractive location that is Woburn. A lot of people want to be here. Our proximity to Boston is incredible. I also think the way, the vibe that is Woburn is attractive to folks. Our teachers, our schools are well regarded. Public safety and the services we provide are second to none. So it's a place where people want to be, which means that those market forces do come to bear. And the more people who want to be here, the more the cost goes up. As a homeowner, someone who owns a house, you're probably thinking, that's great, my house is worth more. So at some point, if I decide to retire, there's some value there that I appreciate. But to your point about, housing instability and the need for more housing for folks, sure, I hear that, and I understand that. I think as a local government, we've tried to do our part with affordable housing components in our zoning. There's been several developments that have gone up in the last 10 years, and we've tried to make sure that there was that affordability piece. We actually increased the requirement to 15% to ensure that we would generate enough. I think that's something positive that local communities can do. For those who are renting and watching increased rental costs, I think one of the things city government can do there is try to maintain a reasonably low tax rate. Because if we're not passing on higher taxes to the landlords, the owners of the property, they don't necessarily have to pass them on to the renters. So I think things like that go a long way towards trying to stabilize as best we can. At the end of the day, it's a great problem to have that a whole lot of people want to live in Woburn. I've got 5 children. I'd love to have them all live in Woburn and be right near us. My second oldest bought a home in Tewksbury. He essentially couldn't afford Woburn. Went a little bit further north to Tewksbury and found a house that he loves. Some of that is just the market forces that we have to deal with. But I think maintaining a solid foundation in terms of a tax base, providing great services, I think those are things that local government can do to try to manage and somewhat stabilize housing costs.
I want all my babies home too, and I already lost one to Rochester, New York. So
that's further than any of mine.
It's a little far. It's a little far. Still, I understand all the reasons why, but a little far for me.
Yep.
One of the attributes of Woburn, we've talked a little bit about sort of economic diversity, but we also have diversity in terms of all kinds of cultures, background, ethnicities, religions, job, like just all the things.
Yep.
And it's one of the things I love about the city that we live in. How do you, as a mayor, represent all the different people who live and work here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I grew up here. I was born here. I've always found Woburn to be an incredibly welcoming community. I hope people feel the same way. I think they do. We're represented by all the groups you just referenced and then some. I think people feel like Woburn is a welcoming community. That's why we have the housing issues. That's why we have, the congestion, the traffic that we deal with sometimes. I think those are all positive reflections of how welcoming we really are. To your point about the mayor representing all those different viewpoints and backgrounds, I do think that's important. I think everybody should feel like, they're a part of the fabric here. And the mayor is the leader of the community. The mayor should set that tone. So I do embrace that. I think essentially, we're talking about some basic common values that most people share, and it's up to the leadership of the city, and it's up to the community to make sure those values are represented. People want a reasonably affordable place to live. They want to have good schools for the kids. They want to have services. I think you match Woburn up against any of our neighbors, I'd take Woburn over any one of them in terms of what we offer. And I think those are the types of things that people are looking for in a community. We welcome all the differences, but at its core, I think there are some essential values that people are looking for, and I think Woburn has those.
I want to talk about something that's a little bit less pleasant, but like every city in the United States and probably around the world, we have folks who are addicted to illegal substances, who struggle with addiction to even legal substances,
Yep.
of things. We have had gun violence in our community. We've had a rash of car break-ins. A friend of mine just recently, in broad daylight, had their wallet taken out of their car, and so look, that is not a Woburn specific problem, but in our community, do you feel that our police are staffed appropriately to address this? Are there measures we can or should be taking to have a more safe community or maintain? I mean, I think relative to other communities, we're very safe.
Yes.
But these are still things that happen. How can we help?
Sure. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as a town. Woburn is a town. Everyone will tell you that has that vibe. But we have 40,000 people here. On any given business day, we have double, triple, 3 times that. So in a lot of ways, we are a city. So we do have some of those city problems, and we have to deal with them. I have a unique background, 26 years in law enforcement. I understand what the Woburn Police Department is up against. I know how highly respected they are in the law enforcement community. I was very proud to be a state trooper, but I'd put Woburn PD up against any police department, from the leadership all the way down. Full disclosure, one of my sons is a Woburn police officer. I think they do a tremendous job. I know they're committed, they care. Chief Rufo leads a great leadership team as well as his force. I think they do an admirable job dealing with big city problems. In terms of staffing, we've talked about that. I know that the more we've developed, the more we've added, particularly in Northeast Woburn, there's some work that's going to need to be done up there. There may indeed need to be additional staffing, patrols. There's been talk of even some sort of satellite station with the fire department and or the police department. So we do need to adjust to the growth of a larger city than it was, when I was a young kid. I think we need to have those discussions to make sure we're keeping up. But I do applaud their efforts, and again, I'd put our department up against anyone.
We received a grant for opioid awareness and to help folks who are struggling with addiction and others avoid addiction, and that's a new position in our city. We haven't yet hired it, but it will be coming. What do you hope that they'll be able to do to help serve our community better?
I view that position as a leadership position, as someone who can bring together the various resources, bring to our attention resources we may not be aware of. I mean, opioid addiction in particular is a huge problem facing this nation. So many of these topics we talk about are national and then to some extent statewide, but of course on the local level we need to deal with them as well. I see that position as somebody who can bring together all sorts of different viewpoints, police, fire, they're all dealing with these issues. And again, maybe attract some sort of additional funding, new ideas. One thing I would expect that person would do is continue to help with destigmatizing the whole problem. I think we've gone a long way towards raising awareness and getting people to understand what's really going on. And these are our neighbors, these are our friends, this is our family. We need to help these people. So I view that position as key. I really look forward to getting the right person in there and letting them run with it.
Over the past 3 years, I've been very fortunate that the mayor has sat down with me almost every week and answered all my annoying questions, and my not annoying ones too, I suppose. And I don't take that for granted. That has been a gift to our community to be willing to do that. And with full candor, I rarely prep ahead of time. The only time I'll let him know a question ahead of time is if there's something I really think he's going to have to ask somebody else about to be prepared to answer, to be able to answer that. And he answers all the questions. We don't always agree on the answer, but he always answers all of them.
Yep,
and
I watch
grateful.
every week.
I'm grateful for that. If you are elected mayor, I hope you will continue that tradition.
I look forward to it.
And I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also, just in general, how do you think about communication across the city? We don't currently have, and I don't see in the near future like a dedicated communications role in our city. but we have a lot going on.
We do.
And so, I hope this show fills some of that gap, but it
I
is
think
only
it does.
one role.
I think it does fill that gap to some extent, and I pledge 100%.
Yeah.
I would welcome any opportunity to get the word out and to get the feedback. Whether it's this show, the Daily Times is still a mechanism to get the word out. I believe in full transparency. I think the communication is the key. It's really important that folks know what their city government is doing, and that we know whether that's what they want us to be doing. So that two-way, even three-way communication, back, forth, back again, is really important to making sure that we're delivering the way we're supposed to be delivering. So I'm all for that. I know that communities that are a little bigger than us, they have gone and hired communications directors, and maybe we're heading there sooner than we think. Maybe it is time in the near future where we talk about that, so we're constantly pumping information out and receiving the feedback. Now, we do have some of those opportunities. We have, on the city website, we have an opportunity for residents to weigh in and offer up, issues and solutions, et cetera, but the more the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I clearly believe that for sure. We have invested quite heavily in infrastructure in our city over the last years. You mentioned some of those big projects when we first sat down, but there's a lot of new infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is one of those things that never ends. My husband always tells me we're now on round 3 of our house, having lived there 30 years of renovating. We're renovating rooms now for a 3rd time. But joking aside, it is something that we as a city are constantly in need to do. What are some of the priorities from your point of view that we need to make sure we're addressing?
Well, as I said, I was proud to participate and vote for and support the work at the library, the Harold Wyman, the fire station. The next thing we're working on, of course, is the PFAS water treatment center down at the pond. The way that the EPA has been dealing with PFAS chemicals and the thresholds that are allowable, we have to respond. So that'll probably be the next big ticket item. I'd love to see at least the beginning of the process for the new Alta Vista Linscott, I guess you'd call it, the new North Woburn School. When we started building all these schools, including this beautiful high school, there was the notion of parity, that every neighborhood in Woburn was going to get a new school, and it was the right thing to do. It's long overdue for North Woburn. So I'd like to see a new school up there. Along with that, we need some work at our middle schools. So we have right now a recently completed feasibility study by the school department, and we're all anxiously awaiting those results. Just before COVID struck, I actually took a tour with the superintendent and many folks of all the schools in town. We went all through, up, down in the basements. I expect that report is going to say there's a lot of work to do. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. We're going to have to invest some money in those things. Beyond that, we have the annual upgrading of the sewer and water system. We're making great strides there. But I'd say those are probably the critical infrastructure issues we're looking at in the near future.
That's great. We are home to many bigger-ish corporations in Woburn, but we're also home to a lot of small businesses, which I really personally love. I love trying out new restaurants, little boutique shops and things around town. As mayor, what do you see as your role in helping support those small businesses so that they can thrive? Yeah,
I think it's a critical role. They are the bread and butter of our community. They employ many of our residents. They're convenient, and it's great to support local community businesses. I would do whatever I could. I support the Woburn Chamber of Commerce now. I think they do a great job. A good friend of mine is the executive director. I think he's done a fabulous job since he took over, Chris Kissel. I know he's reinvigorated that organization, and I would continue to support those efforts. I would encourage all of our residents to use our local businesses as often as possible. I mean, these are the folks they're there for us all the time. They're sponsoring our sports teams and all our community events. They always step up. They never say no. You read the yearbook every year, and those are all our local businesses in there supporting. So it's only right that we support them too. If there's opportunities for the city to engage, in business with these small town businesses, by all means. Of course, we're bound by, bidding laws and all of that, and it's incumbent upon us to save money for the taxpayers. But there are opportunities when we can take advantage of that and buy local.
So you, everyone, not everyone, most people in Woburn know you and your role in City Council, but you do have work outside of City Council that you do.
I do, yeah.
Because you're certainly not making a living wage sitting up City Council. If you are elected mayor, how will you balance those things? Will you quit that job?
I will.
Okay.
I will. I've already spoken with the company I work for. They support this. They know it's something I've wanted to do for a while. So they understand that we have a transition, plan that will work should I be elected. I view the mayor's job as full-time, 24/7. I lived that life for 26 years in the state police. My wife will tell you, most nights I didn't sleep through the night. The beeper back in the day was going off. I'm fully prepared for that type of commitment, and I would make the mayor's job a full-time job and quit my other job.
Last question I have for you. Thank you for answering all of my questions. And we had a lot of viewers send in questions that sort of helped compile this list. You're running against your friend and a longtime colleague. You've worked together for a long time. I know you put a tremendous amount of thought before you decided whether you were going to run for mayor or not.
Yes.
Why do you feel like now's the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that a lot of people have asked me, and certainly Scott and I are friends. I've known Scott since high school. He's a good man. He's a good family man, and this was a tough decision. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I really thought this was going to be it for him, to be honest. And then when he did tell me that he thought he might want to run again, I did some serious thinking about whether now was time for me, and I reached the conclusion that it was. I think it's time for me, professionally and personally. My youngest child, my daughter Katie, is heading off to college. She's going to BC in the fall. I wanted to get to that point where I could, devote completely to the quest for mayor. So personally, my other children have settled in, their careers. So personally, it was a good time. I have the full support of my family. My wife is tremendous. She's supported me in everything I've ever wanted to do, from a crazy idea to go to law school at night while I was a state trooper. She supported me all through that. I thought her name should have been on the degree as well. But having all of their support and having everybody settled, this was a good time personally. As I said, professionally, I have the support of my company, so everything is in place there. That was a good time. And politically, I think it's time. I think it's time for me to step up. I did want to serve on the council and understand more deeply how the city works. I think I've gained that knowledge and experience. I wanted to serve as president. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate the honor that my colleagues bestowed upon me. And I think it's time for me to bring not only my personal experience, but my professional leadership experience at this moment in time in our city. And I think we need it. And I really think that I can contribute. And that's why I want to do this. I love this city. I've been here my whole life. And I really think I can help. And I think I can help now. So that's why I'm asking for people to support me.
Excellent. Well, I'm so grateful for your time today. I'm sure we'll talk again, as we
I
get
look forward
closer
to
to election cycle, but
Yeah.
I'm grateful for all your thoughtfulness and the service you've given our city already.
Thank you.
Woburn, I hope you found these conversations helpful. It's so important, and I'm so grateful that our city leadership continues to be open with us and answer all of our questions. And as always, please continue to take good care of each other.